The camera loved her the way Paris loves its secrets, softly, dangerously, as if both knew the moment was fleeting. In 1960, Jean Seberg walked through the streets of Paris in Breathless, her cropped hair catching the morning light, her voice whispering freedom into a new era of cinema. To the world, she was the face of innocence, reborn an American girl who carried rebellion in her smile. But behind that smile was a silence no one could hear. As the film world adored her, a different kind of lens began to follow one without applause, one that didn't blink. Every letter she wrote, every friend she met, every cause she believed in was quietly recorded by the people who feared her voice more than her beauty. They said she was breathless on screen. They never said how they took her breath away in real life. She was only 17 when Hollywood found her a small-town girl from Iowa, chosen by Otto Preminger to play St. Joan. It should have been a fairy tale. A modern Joan of Arc, radiant, fearless, blessed by destiny. But the fire that burned in Jean Seberg was not just cinematic. It was the kind that could not be controlled. When Breathless arrived, she became the face of the French New Wave. That pixie haircut, that reckless grace, she was freedom personified. The woman who made rebellion look effortless. Directors called her a muse. Critics called her a revolution. Paris called her its own. But fame is never a shelter. It's a window. And as Jean's face filled the screens of Europe, another screen, cold and green, began to track her every move back home. The United States was entering the storm of the late 1960 seconds. Protests, fear, civil rights. Jean believed art could stand beside truth, so she spoke, donated, marched. And for that she was marked. Because behind the shimmering illusion of cinema, another story began to develop, one not written in film reels, but in classified files. Let's step behind the spotlight and see what they never wanted you to know. Jean Seberg was born in Marshalltown, Iowa, a quiet Midwestern town where dreams rarely made it past the cornfields. But even as a child, there was something cinematic about her stillness, as if she already knew her life would be watched, frame by frame. Her father ran a pharmacy. Her mother read poetry at night. Jean wanted both, the realism of work and the rebellion of words. When she was 17, fate came knocking in the form of Otto Preminger's worldwide search for a new St. Joan. Jean was chosen out of 18,000 girls, a modern-day miracle, or a curse disguised as one. The film was meant to make her a star. Instead, it made her a target. Critics tore her apart, calling her wooden, lifeless, a girl who should never have been on screen. The flames that burned Joan of Arc on set seemed to follow Jean long after the cameras stopped, but she refused to vanish. When Jean-Luc cast her in Breathless 1960, she became the heartbeat of a generation. Standing on the Champs, Élysée, selling newspapers, she looked straight into the camera, into us, and smiled like someone who had nothing to hide. For a moment, she was the purest image of freedom the screen had ever seen. Fame followed her like a shadow that grew darker with every spotlight. In Paris, Jean Seberg became a muse. In America, she became a mystery. She spoke with the charm of cinema but thought with the conscience of a citizen. As the 1960 seconds burned with protest and politics, Jean's compassion turned into activism. She donated to civil rights groups, attended marches, and most dangerously supported the Black Panther Party. To her, it was humanity. To the government, it was subversion. Under J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO operation, Jean's name was added to a list not of stars, but of threats. They tapped her phone, followed her car, photographed her mail. Every act of kindness became a line in a classified report. The newspapers that once praised her began printing whispers. Studio doors quietly closed. Friends turned cautious. The young woman who had embodied rebellion on screen now lived under the kind of control no script could predict. In a rare interview, she said softly, "You don't lose yourself in fame, you lose yourself when others decide who you are." By the end of the decade, her smile had changed. It was still beautiful, but it no longer reached her eyes. In 1970, the surveillance turned into something colder, a calculated humiliation. The FBI leaked a false story to the press, that Jean Seberg was pregnant by a member of the Black Panthers. The lie spread faster than any truth could. Headlines carried it like a wound. Her private life became a national spectacle. She was 7 months pregnant when she read those words in a newspaper. Days later, the shock sent her into premature labor. The baby did not survive. Still, the papers printed the story, calling it the scandal of the year. What they never printed was her grief, a mother's silent war fought behind locked doors. From that moment, Jean's life unraveled. She moved between Paris and Los Angeles, between treatment and relapse, between love and betrayal. Directors stopped calling. Her confidence dissolved under the weight of whispers. To a world obsessed with her image, she had become too fragile, too political, too sad. Her letters grew darker, her voice quieter. Friends said she smiled less, spoke less, trusted no one. The girl who once looked into the camera without fear now avoided mirrors. It was not the roles that broke her, it was the silence after the applause. Paris, 1979. The summer air was heavy, the city restless. Jean Seberg had vanished for 10 days. Her friends called the police. Her husband searched the streets. When they found her, she was inside her car motionless, surrounded by fragments of a life that once belonged to the screen. The official report spoke of despair, of exhaustion, of a tragic silence. But to those who knew her story, it felt more like erasure, as if the same system that had watched her for years had finally watched her disappear. There were inconsistencies, unanswered questions, and rumors that never truly died. Some called it coincidence. Others called it consequence. At her funeral in Montparnasse Cemetery, the journalists who had printed her pain now stood behind cameras again, lenses reflecting tears they hadn't earned. Beside her coffin, Romain Gary, the writer who had loved and lost her, whispered, "They broke her wings," and then blamed her for falling. She was 40, the same age as the new generation of filmmakers she had once inspired, the same age as the woman the world thought they knew but never really saw. Jean's final scene ended not in a film, but in a silence too heavy for cinema to hold. Years after her mysterious passing, the files were opened. Pages stamped confidential revealed what Jean had suspected all along, that her destruction had been deliberate, a campaign signed by power and executed by fear. Her name was not erased by scandal, but by strategy. Yet, in the years since, her image has outlived every lie they wrote. Cinephiles rediscovered her in Breathless, seeing now not just a character but a confession, the fragile truth of a woman trying to stay alive in a world that sold her illusion. Modern filmmakers cite her as the first American face of the French New Wave, a symbol of rebellion born from sincerity. To those who watched her in black and white, Jean Seberg remains the color of defiance, bright, impossible to contain. Film schools teach her tragedy as a cautionary tale, but her eyes on screen still speak of something purer, faith in the idea that art could change the world. The girl from Iowa who dreamed of freedom became its most haunting lesson. In trying to silence her, they turned her into an echo that never fades. Fame made her immortal. Power made her invisible. Between those two forces, Jean Seberg became the proof that light and shadow are never separate. They coexist, feeding one another until the image disappears. The spotlight that once adored her became the same beam that exposed her, dissected her, and finally destroyed her. But even in that destruction, there is something eternal. Each time Breathless flickers on a screen, she breathes again, young, defiant, alive. Her voice, soft yet certain, still echoes through time. A whisper against injustice, a sigh against control. Perhaps that is the cruel poetry of fame. It promises immortality, but only through loss. Jean's story reminds us that behind every perfect frame lies a human pulse, trembling beneath the weight of what the world demands to see. Because in the end, the camera stopped, but her truth kept rolling, somewhere between the real and the real. Every story of light hides its own darkness, and every star leaves behind a shadow that never forgets. Jean Seberg's life was more than a tragedy. It was a warning about what happens when truth threatens power, and when empathy becomes rebellion. Which scene of hers stays with you the most, the girl smiling through Paris, or the woman the world chose not to see? Share your thoughts below, and let her story be heard again, not as gossip, but as remembrance. Because the real crime was never her belief. It was the silence that followed it.